The presidency. Here is something strange about American government. The most visible person in the country cannot pass a single law. Not one. The president can ask, push, bargain, veto, and go on television to make the case. But writing and passing laws belongs to Congress. So how did this office become the biggest job in the nation? That is what we are working through today. If you are a student in an American government or political science course, a teacher hunting for something to assign, or a lifelong learner who follows the news and wants to know the machinery behind it, you are in the right place. We will cover how the presidency was invented, how presidents get elected, how they organize to govern, how they speak to the public, and what they can do entirely on their own. Setting the context. Start in Philadelphia, summer of 1787. Under the Articles of Confederation, there was no executive branch at all. The word president existed, but it just meant the person who ran meetings of the Confederation Congress. So the delegates were building from scratch, and they argued about it for months. Edmund Randolph introduced James Madison's plan, which mentioned a national executive, without saying whether that meant one person or a committee. William Patterson's New Jersey plan called for a weak executive committee that state governors could remove at will. Alexander Hamilton went the other direction entirely. One man, chosen by electors, serving for life. The delegates worried about two opposite failures. Make the office too weak and nothing gets done. Make it too strong, and you have recreated the king you just fought a war to escape. They landed on one person, 4-year terms, eligible for re-election. James Wilson wanted voters to elect the president directly. When that was rejected, he suggested electors instead, and by early September, the Electoral College had emerged. Article 2 set the requirements: at least 35 years old, a natural-born citizen, a resident for 14 years. It said nothing about term limits. After Franklin Roosevelt won 4 elections, the 22nd Amendment fixed that at 2 terms. And the escape hatch? Impeachment. The House charges by simple majority. The Senate removes by 2/3, with the Chief Justice presiding. Main points. 1. The office grew, one precedent at a time. Nobody amended the Constitution to make the presidency powerful. Presidents just acted, and the actions stuck. Washington created a cabinet, then issued a neutrality proclamation in 1793 that stretched his role as chief diplomat. Adams fought an undeclared war with France. Jefferson bought Louisiana, then reasoned that since Congress did not impeach him, it must have approved. Monroe used an annual message to warn Europe out of the Western Hemisphere. Jackson issued 12 vetoes, more than every president before him combined, and he used them over policy disagreements rather than legal objections. That is how vetoes work to this day. Polk provoked a border crisis with Mexico and left Congress reacting to a war already underway. Lincoln suspended habeas corpus and issued the Emancipation Proclamation as a military necessity. Congress has handed over power too. The Budget and Accounting Act of 1921 put the executive branch in charge of drafting the federal budget and gave the president a budget staff, later renamed the Office of Management and Budget. Congress gave that away on purpose because its own piecemeal process could not keep up. 2. Getting elected changed dramatically. Nomination power moved through 3 stages. First came the King Caucus, where members of Congress picked the nominees. Then came national conventions run by party leaders. Then came primaries and caucuses, which handed the choice to voters and turned conventions into televised advertisements. The 1824 election lit the fuse. Andrew Jackson won the popular vote and the most electors, but the House gave the presidency to John Quincy Adams. His furious supporters built a 2-party system out of the wreckage. The consequences of the primary system are real. Campaigns run long and cost a fortune. Kennedy announced 11 months before the 1960 election. Hillary Clinton announced nearly 2 years before 2008. Primary voters lean more partisan than general election voters, so candidates run to the edges, then scramble back toward the middle. Party outsiders can win. Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, and Bernie Sanders all made deep runs without the blessing of party leadership. Then the Electoral College takes over. 538 electors, 270 to win. 48 states plus D.C. award all their votes to the statewide winner. Maine and Nebraska split theirs by congressional district. In 1876, 1888, 2000, and 2016, the popular vote winner did not become president. Reform proposals include a national popular vote, proportional electors, and the National Popular Vote Compact, which so far has 17 states and D.C. signed on, worth 209 electoral votes. 3. Winning is not governing. The transition begins immediately. Smart candidates build a transition team before Election Day because the calendar is brutal. A new president fills roughly 4,000 civilian positions. The cabinet runs 15 departments, and 4 of them, State, Defense, Justice, and Treasury, are called the inner cabinet because they get the most attention. All of those need Senate confirmation, and most sail through. Occasionally, one does not. John Tower was rejected outright, and Zoe Baird withdrew. More recently, the Senate has used a quieter weapon that scholars call malign neglect. Simply refuse to hold hearings. That is what happened to Merrick Garland's Supreme Court nomination in 2016, while Amy Coney Barrett's moved quickly in 2020. Some choices need no approval at all. The Chief of Staff, the National Security Advisor, and the Executive Office of the President, which Franklin Roosevelt created. The Vice Presidency changed too. It used to be political exile. Republicans made Theodore Roosevelt a running mate mostly to get him out of the way, and then McKinley was assassinated. Since Carter, vice presidents have been governing partners. 4. Speaking directly to the country. Theodore Roosevelt called the office a bully pulpit, a platform for pushing an agenda straight to the people. Then the tools multiplied. FDR delivered 30 fireside chats over the radio. Television favored Kennedy and Reagan. Social media let presidents skip reporters completely. But going public has a catch. Political scientist George Edwards argues that a public campaign hardens opposition and replaces negotiation with combat. It rallies people who already agree. It rarely changes minds. First ladies discovered the same platform. Eleanor Roosevelt pushed civil rights and wrote a newspaper column. Lady Bird Johnson built the office of the First Lady. Betty Ford spoke openly about her breast cancer. Hillary Clinton chaired a healthcare task force and became a lightning rod for it. 5. Acting alone. Presidents have tools that need nobody's permission. Executive orders, executive memoranda, pardons, and executive agreements with other countries, which skip the 2/3 Senate vote a treaty requires. They also issue signing statements explaining how they intend to enforce a law they just signed. The line-item veto was the exception. Congress granted it in 1996, and the Supreme Court struck it down 2 years later. A closer look. Here is why direct action cuts both ways. In February 1942, weeks after Pearl Harbor, Franklin Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066. On paper, it authorized removing people from military areas. Then the military declared the entire West Coast a military area. More than 110,000 Japanese Americans, most of them citizens, lost their homes and businesses and spent 2.5 years in relocation camps. No law passed Congress. No court approved it in advance. One signature did that. Fred Korematsu refused to go. He hid in California, was caught, and was sent to the same camp in Utah holding his family. He kept fighting in court. In 1944, the Supreme Court ruled against him 6-3, accepting the government's claim that national security justified the order. The story does not end there. 44 years later, President Reagan signed an official apology and compensation for survivors. In 2011, the Justice Department formally acknowledged that the Solicitor General had argued the case in error. And in 2014, Justice Antonin Scalia said plainly that while he believed the ruling was wrong, something like it could happen again. So what checks this? Courts, sometimes. During the Korean War, the Supreme Court threw out Truman's seizure of the steel industry. Congress sometimes, by passing a law. And successors almost always. Recent presidents have made a habit of reversing predecessors' orders in the first week. That is the weakness built into acting alone. Orders that rest on prior congressional authority tend to survive. Orders invented from scratch tend to get erased. Which brings us to Richard Neustadt's famous claim from 1960. Presidential power is the power to persuade. Legislation lasts because it is hard to undo. An executive order lasts until the next election. Persuasion is slower, and it is the only path to anything durable. Conclusion and key takeaways. 4 things worth carrying out of this. First, the framers built the office deliberately incomplete. Vague wording in Article 2 left room that presidents have been filling in ever since. Second, the growth of the office came from every direction. Presidents claiming power, Congress handing it over, wars demanding fast decisions, and technology giving one person a national microphone. Third, acting alone is often a sign of blocked options rather than raw strength. Executive orders are fast, and they are fragile. Fourth, the strongest presidents usually are not the ones who defied everyone. They are the ones who read their moment correctly and built support that outlived them. If this helped, subscribe for the rest of this American government series. Next up, we look at the branch that gets to tell the president no.